guys, it's Mrs. Jewell. Today we're going to be working on packet pages 19 and 20, which are a little bit different. We have this to read, and then on the back of that there's a chart you're going to be filling in. You are going to stay right with me. When I tell you to pause the video, just pause it and then hit play, and you will get through this pretty quickly. It's a very short little passage that we're reading. It has to do with Carl Hiaasen and how he feels about Florida and why he writes about Florida. So it's kind of reviewing what we did last time. I'm going to start right at the top with the title. I'm going to read everything all the way through. Then I'm going to go over some words that you're going to see along the way, or that you had already heard. And then we'll go through it again with the questions. So right now, just listen to it one time through. There's going to be some stuff that you don't know and understand, some words you don't know and understand, but that's pretty common the first time through something, so don't worry about that, okay? So this is 5 creative tips from Carl Hiaasen, Florida's cleverest chronicler, by Jessica Gross. By any measure, Carl Hiaasen is a prolific writer. He is the author of more than a dozen books and continues to write a newspaper column. Here he shares with us the secrets of getting it done when you're surrounded by beautiful distractions. Excerpt, tip number 4. The best satire comes from a place of affection. I feel lucky to be born and raised in Florida and have genuine family roots there. It affects the way I work. It affects the degree to which I care about the place. As much as I write about the crazy aspect and what's wrong with it, I have tremendous affection. All my grandkids are here. It's not a throwaway location for me. There are very few places in the state that don't have an emotional attachment for me. It helps the writing. It helps the satire. I have a lot of strong feelings, and it's a great sharp edge. When you grow up in Florida where it's completely flat, it's so vulnerable to development and exploitation. I've always said that in writers' groups. I couldn't write or be as funny in my writing about Florida if I didn't care about it so much. So you will see, if you glance at my paper, let me do it this way, that I have some notes all over it. So when I'm going through this with you, you can certainly make little notes. I'm going to start with the title. It says he's Florida's cleverest chronicler. A chronicler is just a writer. So they're using a little alliteration there, cleverest chronicler, by saying that he's a smart writer, okay? Then in the first sentence in the italics, it says by any measure he's a prolific writer. Prolific just means that he writes a lot, and that's kind of explained in what comes after that. He's the author of more than a dozen books and continues to write a newspaper column. So he writes a lot. Then you have an excerpt. We've talked about that a lot this year. It's just a part of something. And it says the best satire comes from a place of affection. Satire means humor about weaknesses or bad qualities. Sometimes I think of satire as being similar to sarcasm. It's not the same thing, but it's a way that it helps me to remember it. So again, if you want to jot that down above satire, it's humor about weaknesses or bad qualities. And then, so I guess what I would say is Dusty Muleman has a really bad quality in the book. There's a lot of humor mixed into the story about Dusty Muleman, okay? He says it comes from a place of affection. Affection is just when you like someone, okay, or something. So I'm just going to go through slowly this time, stopping several times. The first sentence, pretty straightforward. I feel lucky to be born and raised in Florida and have genuine family roots there, okay? So it's where he is from, okay? Then it goes on to, it affects the way I work. It affects the degree to which I care about the place. And in a second, you're going to be asked what affects the way he works, and you've kind of got your answer right in that first sentence. So there's your first hint. As much as I write about the crazy aspect and what's wrong with it, I have tremendous affection. So again, he likes it a lot. All my grandkids are here. It's not a throwaway location for me. So he can't forget about it. He can't pretend that there aren't problems that he worries about. There are very few places in the state that don't have an emotional attachment from me. An emotional attachment, we've talked about this year when we've talked about something that you value, even if it doesn't have a lot of monetary or money value to it. So something that's near and dear or special to you, sometimes because it was given to you by somebody important or somebody special. I actually think the example I used in class a long time ago is that my daughter wears a ring that was my mom's, so it was her grandmother's. It's not a particularly valuable ring as far as money is concerned, but she has tremendous affection for it because, and an emotional which brings about the emotional attachment, okay? There's an emotional attachment to that ring, even though it's just a ring, okay? It helps the writing, it helps the satire. So again, it helps him to be funny about things that are serious. I have a lot of strong feelings, and it's a great sharp edge. When you grow up in Florida, where it's completely flat, it's so vulnerable to development and exploitation. If something's vulnerable to something, what you're saying there is that it's open to it. It's going to happen, and says it's open to development and exploitation, so being exploited, being used. One of your answers to one of the questions is in that sentence, so we'll go back to it. I don't want to give away too much too quickly. And then it says, I've always said that in writers groups, I couldn't write or be as funny in my writing about Florida if I didn't care about it so much. All right. If you need to, pause, go back, and read that all for yourself one more time. Kind of look it over. And then we'll turn to the question sheet. Here's what I want you to know. In the answer column, you're going to put a quote. Now, I don't want you to copy it, so I'm going to hold it way far away. You probably can't see it at all. Sorry, probably not very helpful. What I want you to know is that what I have in those quote boxes is pretty short and sweet. It's not a ton of writing, okay? It's really going right back to the text and finding the evidence to support the answer. So it says, what affects the way Carl Hiaasen cares about Florida? So you have that phrase right in the second sentence. It affects the way I work. So you've got to go back to the first sentence and find what that it is. What affects the way he works? Go ahead, pause the video and copy the quote from that first sentence into your box for number 1 for your answer for your quote. So pause and copy. And now that you've copied something down, I have 4 whole words in my first box. I put that what affects the way Carl Hiaasen cares about Florida is his genuine family roots there. You could have certainly put more of that sentence, but you definitely want something there about his family roots. Okay. On to number 2. This is that phrase, tremendous affection. Why does Carl Hiaasen have tremendous affection for Florida? So we were talking about that. Tremendous affection is in the 3rd line, halfway over. Okay, he says, I have tremendous affection. And then right after that phrase, he says why in the next kind of sentence and a half, 2 sentences. So go ahead and pause the video. Find a quote or 2 that you can use from right after that phrase as to why he has a tremendous affection for Florida. Okay, at this point, when you're unpausing the video, you should have something in that box number 2. Copied word for word, so I guess to not completely give it away, I'll give you a couple of phrases. There's one quote about his grandkids. Okay, so you could use that quote about his grandkids. And then go back to what I was saying about emotional attachment. You could use the quote around that phrase, an emotional attachment, okay? So you want to be thinking family and his memories while he was there, which might give you a hint for your perspective box in a minute. Number 3, The answer is really straightforward. So when you go to look for it, don't think too hard about it. I'll explain it after you find it. But for number 3, it says, according to Hyacin, why is Florida vulnerable? And we talked about that word, okay? So it's in the very last sentence. When you grow up in Florida where it's completely flat, it's so vulnerable to development and exploitation. So go ahead and pause the video and write down, what is it about Florida that makes it so vulnerable? And now that you are unpaused, you should have something in number 3. I really can't give you a hint here. It's pretty straightforward, that it's completely flat. So if you've been to Florida, kind of try to go back there for a second and look around in your mind. There are no hills. There are very few hills. There are no mountains, okay? I know, see, if we were in school, Miss Muckle would tell you that her brother and sister-in-law built a house in Grafton. Building a house in Grafton was really, really difficult because they basically had to dig into the side of a mountain, which is a lot of rock. It's very, very difficult. Miss Duquette, who has come in and substituted for you guys a couple of times, had issues building her house because of the land and trying to get to water and dig a well, which has to do with the layout of our land around here. So in our area, there are areas that are really hard to develop. It costs a lot of money to develop in a hilly, mountainous area. Florida is completely flat, very vulnerable to growth because it's so easy to build there. Okay, it's easy to clear land there. So that is one of the reasons so much has changed in Florida, which is one of the, it'll be one of your research possibilities next week when you do a project for this, that a lot of what Hyacin worries about in Florida is the overdevelopment, okay? And then those people who are coming in and developing, not treating it correctly. So to relate it to the book, Dusty Muleman figured out a way to have his casino boat there to make money. It wasn't a new development. He didn't build onto land, but instead, because he's not being kind and caring and thoughtful, he is destroying the water, which is impacting not only the water life, but also, you know, the kids trying to go swimming and things like that at the beach. So you should have all 3 quotes filled in for numbers 1, 2, and 3. So the 3 little boxes. So right there. I hope I showed it to you. So then we go over to perspective. So again, we're talking about point of view as how somebody feels about something, their perspective about it, what they think about it. So your question says, and I know it's a little hard to read there, as a result of what you have read so far, how has being born and raised in Florida affected Carl Hyacin's perspective of the place? So how does he feel about Florida? How does he feel about what's happening in Florida? You could include why it's happening. And all I need there is 2 to 3 sentences with your thoughts, okay? You can really just kind of use the quotes we just went through, maybe some thoughts about the book and the plot of the book to help you with that, but just 2 to 3 sentences telling me how being born and raised in Florida has impacted or affected how he feels about the place. All right, guys, and then you're done for the day. So really, by the time you're done watching this video, you write a few sentences and you're all set with ELA. We'll get back to the book tomorrow. Have a great day, guys.